Goes.
Four, three, two, one, zero. Ignition.
Your journey begins.
Now, here is your host.
Lawrence Bonnema. Yes, that's my name.
He talks right, he knows his stuff, and he knows how to make a girl laugh.
Okay, so that may not have been entirely appropriate, but I like to start the webinars with a bang, as we say. Of course, we're only 9 people in, so we'll probably wait just a few more minutes until we get started. And rest assured, I won't do that again with the sounds. It's just me having a little bit of fun with my new setup. Of course, as trainers, we try out all kinds of stuff, and I thought this might be a good thing to try as well. So welcome to anybody coming in while we're waiting for people to join. Introduce yourself in the chat. This is a live webinar, so you're actually really on call with me right now. My name's Lawrence Bonnema. I'm an Agile trainer and management consultant with Gladwell Academy. And I've about 14 years of full-time Agile coaching experience and a total of, I think, about 20 to 21 years with any type of Agile framework. I started out as a programmer using extreme programming. And at the time, I wrote COBOL, which is actually kind of sad, come to think of it. But then afterwards, my life improved. I started coding Java, C, C++, the better languages, in my opinion. And of course, after a couple of years, I decided I wanted to do something else, mostly because there were way better programmers than me. So I did the next logical thing. I became a team lead. And after a while, I decided the better way to lead is probably servant leadership. And that's how I came in to become a real Agile coach. The fun thing with COBOL there, Robert, is I can still explain algorithms better than most newly minted computer science majors that come into the companies I work with, even though that freaks them out a little bit because obviously I'm an Agile coach, so they don't expect you to actually code. And just to maybe date myself a little bit here, I've been programming since 1984, of course, only writing production code since 1999. But I'm a bit of a geek here. Codes for C plugins for VS Code. Nice. And actually, that COBOL, it made me happy because it got me my first programming gig during the Millennium Bug thing. And I was one of the people willing to do it, right? So a lot of people thought COBOL was on the way out. It's still being coded and it's still being used for blazing fast algorithms. Good. So it's now 10:03, so it's time to start this webinar. Welcome all of you who are in. Please just type in the chat where you're from, what's your name, and what's on your mind. And do note that if you pop a question in the Q&A, I'll be monitoring that as we go along and try to answer all those questions as they pop up as well. So I'm trying to not have a lot of questions at the end, even though, of course, there will be room for questions at the end. And other than most webinars, we're not actually selling you anything, or are we? Well, interestingly, we're not selling our own product this webinar. We might be casually pointing you towards some other products we like, because after 363 days in lockdown, that's the current tally. So it's almost a full year here in the Netherlands. It started with us essentially getting the immediate question, how do you do that? PI planning in a virtual environment. So we've been doing this for over a year now. And of course, we started out by doing the logical thing one does when informed of a pandemic hitting and therefore needing to go fully online with something like PI planning that up until that time was even trained as, no, it has to be an in-person event. You have to fly over. Everybody has to be there. There is really no way to do this as effective by doing it remote. And we just had to figure out a way to make it work real quick. So as I said, and while I say, of course, also hi to Jan Blach, welcome to the webinar, Jan. But yeah, to be honest, the first thing I did was still in my mind a logical response, but I freaked out a little because I just thought it couldn't be done. Really, it was. This was sort of my state of mind that you see here being presented behind me, and of course, right after I started to think, and I thought, okay, so PI planning essentially is one of the agile tenets on steroids, right? Safe takes agile to the next level with PI planning. That's what it says literally in the PI planning guidance, and it essentially ties into the Agile Manifesto principle that the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to a team, to a development team, to and with a development team, within a development team, is face-to-face conversation. So therefore, get all the faces together. If you have a team of teams, and of course, chaos will ensue. But if it's structured a little, like magic, out pops an awesome plan, especially if you follow the rules, right? So that was good. Yeah, realizing, okay, so I can just go back to basics, and then essentially it shouldn't be much more difficult than just tweaking PI planning a little. So on that happy note, I thought I'd pretty much solved it. I may have oversimplified it a little because, as you can see, there's not a lot of difference between these two descriptions. Smack on virtual PI planning, and then say, well, take it to the next level with real-time concurrent virtual PI planning. And I'm on purpose making a little bit of fun here of myself and the industry that we're in general, because of course this is what we did 1 week after Corona hit. Everybody started writing articles about how they've been doing this remote forever, even though it was only a few days. And then we did the next logical thing that all real consultants do when faced with a crisis. I looked for bigger and better tools to get it done. And of course, there's lots of tools, right? So there is, for example, Mural, which is still one of my favorites. And yes, you can use that for remote collaboration. And of course, this is not a Mural sales pitch. So even though I completely love Mural, especially the fact that you can synchronize cards in Mural with, for example, Jira or Azure DevOps or Rally or version 1 or whatever lifecycle management tool that you're using. So yeah, that was what I started to use. And of course, I immediately figured out that real-time sync has its disadvantages as well. Because yes, like the good people from Rentouch also discovered and having their beautiful videos, they if you delete something, you also delete it in your lifecycle management tool. So I turned that off real quick. But still, it's awesome. You can definitely use that. Of course, that was not the only tool on the market, right? So again, I'm not selling you any specific tools here. I'm just talking about my journey of the past year and how to figure out how to do remote PI planning well. The other tool, of course, they're usually mentioned in one and the same sentence. They also sort of sound the same, Mural, Miro. A lot of people tend to be confused between the two because they pretty much do the same thing. They're an awesome online whiteboard with a lot of freedom. And therefore, for me, for a long time, they were the go-to tool because it had a lot of leeway. You could essentially design anything on the board. You could make it really look like a PI planning board. Of course, completely manual, everything. And sometimes it became a little bit of a drag because, well, you have to configure literally everything by hand in advance to make it work like you see here on the slide. That said, of course, I'm paid to do that. So I was happy to do that for a long while. And this is actually the tool I used when I consulted with the University of Wageningen. And actually, so this is really one of the first actual remote PI planning tools that I used, and it worked. I mean, it didn't work brilliantly, but it worked. They had their results every quarter, and I think they're still using it. Now, on my big tool hunt, because 2 tools is of course not enough for a real consultant, I also found Stormboard, which I kind of liked, but never ended up actually using because Mural and Miro, well, satisfied me enough. But Stormboard has something beautiful that it allows you to layer everything in such a way as to automate most of this stuff without immediately syncing with your lifecycle management tool. So I was looking for something similar to this, but that worked out of the box. Of course, didn't find it immediately because with my clients, I need to sync with the two big ALM players on the market. On the one end, Jira with their own tool, by the way, that I also discovered, Jira Line. But in all honesty, I didn't really like using that. It works, by the way, so it does. It's definitely worth looking into. But of course, I don't want to be like a tool consultant. I just want to use it. Same thing holds true for Azure DevOps from Microsoft. It's the other end of the spectrum. A lot of effort went into making that work as well. In all honesty, I find their guidance pretty good. Of course, you have to do almost everything yourself, which is both good and bad because you can configure it to your heart's content and then also end up spending 2 months doing that. So usually that's pretty much it for like the main board tools and how to sync and all that stuff. And yes, I'm still talking tools because of course there was the debate between should you use Zoom or must it be Teams? And while we're at it, yeah, we're on the Google platform, so let's use Google Meet. And then before you know it, there were of course other, not just entrants on the markets, but old people in the market, well, not old people, sorry, I'm not trying to insult you, WebEx, but they were one of the first players on the on this particular market for video conferencing, and I've seen a lot of companies like really move into these types of tools. And there was, of course, a big debate which one is more secure, and we couldn't use Zoom anywhere because it had to be Teams, and then Teams was like pretty brilliantly hacked quite to the bone, which means that it really didn't matter which tool you picked; they were all hacked. Including, I think, well, actually, I don't know that, so let's not say WebEx was. But there were a lot of tools also popping around, right? Because a lot of people jumped on the Corona bandwagon. One of the nicer ones that I found that I actually want to point out is Butter. It used to be called meetbutter.io. A weird name, but it's like smooth as butter. It was really nice for workshops. Did one PI planning in it. Didn't really hold up with that many people. So stopped using it, but I liked the twist they had on how to meet. And while researching that, of course, I also looked at Control the Room and at Slack because, well, you need some chat as well. And while we were doing that, of course, if you look at Slack, you also look at Discord because, well, a lot of gamers use that, and that's sort of the same thing, but it has like real-time voice connection built in. And while I was doing all this and looking at all these wonderful tools, of course, I even found templates to use with these tools. And these are templates from the good folk by Voltage Control. They are absolutely awesome. So if you don't want to design your own, have a look there. And they're free, by the way. So that's not expensive at all. Voltage Control, good friends. They have become good friends by me using almost all of their templates on a daily basis. But then it struck me, and it probably strikes you as well, a little over 10 minutes into this webinar. But wait a second. Wasn't there this thing? I think I read it somewhere. Could have been the Agile Manifesto that said the people and interactions over processes and tools. And what were we doing in those first few weeks or even months of Corona? Yeah, we were kind of hopping on the tool as a problem as a solution to the people problem. Yeah, so you can already hear Stadler and Waldorf from the Muppets laughing their ass off. Like, yeah. I mean, come on, this wasn't the right way to go. You looked at all the tools, and you thought that was the solution. Now, honestly, to do remote PI planning well, you need awesome tools. That's absolutely a fact. However, you need to go back to what PI planning really is. The idea of PI planning is to align to a shared mission and vision, practice radical transparency, and continually inspect and adapt in both planning and execution. That's my personal take on PI planning, by the way. And I do borrow a little bit from my friends from Rentouch there, but I add a little bit of my Scrum roots into it. because in my opinion, this is what PI planning should be all about. This is what we're optimizing for. This is what we're looking for great tools for, if we're looking for great tools at all. So I went in full reverse mode, and I just started asking people what kind of tools they liked. Mindful of that very first Agile Manifesto principle, people and interactions over processes and tools, and noting that I had veered firmly to the right of the Agile Manifesto, I thought, okay, so let's pull on the brakes, veer left, and just ask people what they like to use, which turned out to be kind of the same tools that I was already looking into, but now I did it in the right order. So instead of me promoting Zoom because that's what I love to use, because I was used to using it, because I already used it before COVID even hit, I taught myself Teams not because I like it, because I still prefer Zoom, to be really honest, but because all my clients use it. So there was really no excuse. I had to become as good with that tool as with the tool I preferred, not force that on anybody, because the solution is never the tool. The solution is what it allows you to do, which is effectively collaborate and communicate. So if everybody prefers Teams or they have to use it, it's on me as a trainer and coach to figure out the best way to do that. And of course, you really spend some time with a tool, you'll become really well versed at it. So everything I didn't like about a tool, for example, like Microsoft Teams, I figured a way around. So no breakout rooms. Well, actually, they do have that now, but they don't work perfectly, and they are kind of underperformant compared to the functionality in Teams. But well, you can just add separate teams in there, or not separate teams. You can add separate groups within a team and start calls in there. Of course, you've all figured this out for yourself by now. This is common knowledge, but that was a big discovery for me. Also, that it actually allowed one of the agile values to thrive a little bit more, which is self-organization. Now you could like quickly hop from team to team, which up until that point was not possible in Zoom. And lo and behold, 1 week later, Zoom got the option to allow people to jump from breakout room to breakout room. So actually, this COVID thing is improving the functionality that we use hand over heels. So let's look into this a little bit more. What I found in doing this for a year is that there can be only three. Actually, you need only three. You need a good video conferencing solution, and it really, honestly, doesn't really matter what it is, as long as there's a way to do breakouts in it. And yes, it's okay if those are separate calls, as long as they have permanent links that everybody can click on and then join that breakout. A separate chat functionality. Now, if you're using Teams, that's built in, so you can use the chat there. But if you're using Zoom, the chat that we're currently using here, for example, that's not persistent, and it doesn't stay open between rooms. So you can't easily communicate between rooms without actually joining the room just by using chat. So there, maybe you need something else, something you're probably already using for a different purpose. Could be WhatsApp or Slack or whatever. And a visual collaboration tool, such as, for example, Mural, Miro, whatever, but still, you only need one. You don't need all of them, and just then really use it. And the best way to figure out which ones to use is just vote. Ask the teams, what would you prefer to use? Just asking that question is a very powerful move, because now people want to use the tool they selected, and they will understand that if 125 people start talking which tool to use, that the choice may be not the one they suggested, right? So it's the most often suggested tool, and if we take 125 licenses for it, the most cost-effective one turned out to be this one, so therefore that's the one we're going to use and the one we're going to train you in. There's one question here: is the tool plugged in to Jira and ADO? Yes, actually it was. Just being mindful of the tools I've showed so far. The one I showed with the interaction, yes, it was plugged in. You can just easily set up a JSON connection there. But without getting too technical, because I don't know if everybody knows about JSON and that kind of interfacing. But it's real easy. It's just a few clicks of the button and dragging some fields, and then they have bi-directional sync, almost all of them, which is both awesome and really, really scary, because sometimes that goes wrong, like with the deletion of one field and therefore deleting all the estimates for all the stories in the entire Jira database. That actually happened. Good, but the interesting thing is, even though there can be only 3, you only need 3. That means that you have to have 6. And here's why: you need fallback options. As a trainer, I know this firsthand in any training I give using Mural, which is my preferred tool. I always have a backup in Miro at the ready, because for some reason, whenever Mural is offline, and sometimes it is, turns out that Miro is then online, and they kind of change who is currently offline or experiencing problems for some reason. And the same thing holds true for video conferencing options. Never just have one tool at the ready. Always have another one configured, not as the primary thing, but as a fallback option. Same thing holds true for chat. I actually had whole trains also on a WhatsApp group just to make sure that we could chat. Maybe overdoing that a little, but well, it's my job to not just overdo that a little, but to be prepared, because yes, that's the main thing, of course. With all PI planning, be it in person or online, you must prepare for the thing that you're doing. And if that's PI planning, you need to prepare quite a bit. So here's the age-old 7P model. Proper previous planning prevents poor PI planning performance. 7P's easy to remember. And of course, a little bit of a pun on the other 7P acronym. But anyway, the main thing you need to do in terms of preparation is tweak the agenda. And you have to tweak the agenda quite a bit, especially if you're also being distributed. And that's because online meetings tend to be not as much fun as real-time meetings, very tiring, and therefore you need to figure out a way to either have better breaks, more engagement, or just a shorter day. And especially if you're working distributed, I found with my colleagues in India that apparently they also have evenings, and they like them, and they also like to spend them not working, which means that if you're really working in an agile fashion and respecting people, that you break before the clock hits 6 p.m. in your most Eastern team. And if you're working all the way from the US, that leaves you like a 4, maybe 6 hour window if you stretch what seems reasonable a little bit. So never an 8-hour day. But PI planning, if you look at the calendar, if you look at the agenda, is actually an 8-hour thing. So you would need to tweak the agenda quite a bit. I'll show you an example shortly of how to do that. And actually, it's the example, so no rocket science there. The one that Scaled Agile Inc. came up with in their first PI planning that did remote. Then the tools. I'll talk to the ones I ended up selecting. And even though I said you only need 6, turns out I needed 8 to really make it work, both with the fallback options and all that stuff. So I'll talk a little bit about those. And really, really important, do yourself the favor of really running a simulation, preferably with almost everyone present, but at least one representative from each team, so that the boards that you've set up, everything that you have prepared, is really tested. Do not test this on day 1 of the actual planning event, because if you discover on day 1 of the actual planning event that you need one of the fallback options, but you haven't tested it, and then the fallback option doesn't work, that's not good, because now a whole train has reserved time for this event, and that they'll remember. I had one of those failed events, and that was pretty painful. They forgave me, of course, but it was still pretty painful. We had to figure out a way to make it work anyway, and nobody liked that PI planning. So, of course, when you want to figure out how to do this well, the first thing you do is to look at the SAFE website. It was, to be honest, not the first thing I did. I did that after maybe half a year, which is, come to think of it, pretty weird because, of course, on that website, they have a lot of guidance. And one of the guidance articles there, although arguably they only published this recently, is a really wonderful article on how exactly to do remote PI planning right. And they drank their own champagne, so to speak, because they did it themselves and then documented what worked for them and what didn't. A part of the advice I've been giving you so far actually comes from that article that you see here online. But the most important bit of it was the exact tweak that they did to their agenda. They split it across 3 days, taking into account both time zones on the extremes, like figuring that the intermediate time zones would kind of sort of figure it out. I would always add another column for the other time zone as well. But then they pretty much stuck to the script. There's one more tweak I would make to this, because as with all these PI planning guidance articles, they have a lot of time for presentation. And you probably noticed this already, but after about 20 minutes of presentation, people become bored. Doesn't really matter if it's a subject that they like, they love, they need to work with, or whatever kind of thing that you're presenting, especially online. But this used to be true in person, to be honest, as well. There is a reason for the 20-minute TEDx limit. After 20 minutes, people just stop really listening. They can't help themselves. Probably they stop listening after 2 minutes. But I do really hope somebody's listening here still. So if you could like type in a sign of life to just show me, yes, I'm still here and still listening to this, that would be wonderful. Maybe pop in a question if you have one. But with this agenda, armed with this agenda, I then started to work with the teams that I consult with to improve the way that we did this, and always spread it out across 3 days, not 2. So 3 6-hour days as opposed to 2 8 to 10-hour days. That worked way better remote, was received way better with also our distributed teams. That pretty much makes sense. But, well, to be honest, that was already in the original distributed PI planning article. So let's talk tools for a second, because obviously that's what a lot of people really do like, even though it's a right side of the manifesto thing. One tool that was brought to my attention by my team members, the teams that I consulted with, I didn't even know about this, and then I saw literally this little GIF, and I was like, oh, that looks simplistic. That looks like how I would not code it myself, because I like a different design. But it also looks like something that is supremely geared towards exactly the thing I'm doing. And that is something that over the course of my years, both as a programmer and as a manager, I come to appreciate. Sometimes it's better to have a tool that really does one thing extremely well. And because I by now run into Mural and Miro sync issues, and also into a lot of needing to do a ton of manual preparation, especially for larger trains of up to like 200 to 300 people, you can spend a week creating the boards to get that right. And then you'll always have something wrong there. And yeah, of course, you recognize this PI planning tool. Very, very useful. The license is very expensive. Actually, I found that for what we were using it for, it turns out to be cheaper than the alternatives. And that's not because the alternatives are very expensive or cheap. The alternative being the time wasted figuring out the other tool and how to get that right. But I'll get there later, because the first thing, what were those tools that I ended up selecting and that we're now talking about? For me, it's Zoom and Teams. I can use any of the current video conferencing tools because I have to be able to do that. But as a general rule, I make sure that it will work and is set up for any PI that I'm coaching in both Zoom and Teams. So if my client has Teams as a preference, it is set up in Teams, of course, but I have Zoom as a fallback option. And if they don't care, I will always use Zoom as the primary option because, well, that's the one I like best. But I will always set up a Teams tenant to serve as a fallback option for whatever reason. If Zoom doesn't really work, or it craps out, or it turns out that somebody turned on their Blue Coat server and it's being deep packet inspected and therefore doesn't perform well at all, then Teams tend to be a little bit more like network friendly, especially specific network friendly. And of course, where I now say Teams, it's the tool the customer is standardizing on. So sometimes it's Google Meet, sometimes it's WebEx, sometimes it's another tool. But there's really not much of a difference anymore between them if you learn. But anyway, so for me, these are the two go-to tools that I always set up everything in with regard to video conferencing. And then I use both Slack and Discord for chat. Of course, not everybody wants to use Slack or wants to use Discord, but a tool like that is absolutely beneficial without using the chat functionality in Zoom or, well, arguably in Teams. It really works as you would need it. So you could say Slack or Teams or Discord, but I find that a lot of people also like, specifically with Discord, what they like is the playfulness of the tool. And the reason I'm adding that as a separate thing is that to be able to chat amongst each other between teams without necessarily breaking into the call apparently is very helpful. It's like sending an email, but then without the wait time of the email. It's a little bit more immediate, but not as immediate as actually barging in and saying, hey, I'm here, I have a dependency. So it's exactly that middle ground that, of course, Slack was designed to fill. And I find that in PI planning, it really also serves that purpose. So even if you never use it for anything else, try it as a separate communications channel and keep it open all the time, but have the team structure in there as well, right? So a channel for every team, a channel for the main room, maybe a question to the business owner channel and a question to the program, the product manager channel, something like that. Then, as I already hinted at, Mural and Miro are my go-to tools for visual collaboration. And then, yes, piplanning.io. I haven't really found a wonderful alternative to it, which I think for them is good news, because none of the other tools I tried do as good a job. And therefore, I just wanted to show you a little bit of what the board looks like. In all honesty, I don't think this is particularly beautiful, but it is highly functional, because this is, of course, the program board, including the red strings and all that stuff. But instead of having to add them manually, the process of planning creates these strings. And I find that particularly interesting, the way that they've implemented this in this tool. Here you see the team boards where the team plans their iterations, and as they type in stuff, it will then be marked either as a risk or as a dependency. And as they mark a dependency on another team board, there will pop a dependency sticky, immediately signaling if that is either unestimated or estimated, and if that will increase their load too much, because you can see here there's one of those fields is marked red to signal that, yeah, apparently one of those is too much, so you need to change the plan there a little bit. And of course, if you have good working agreements in place, that would mean that, for example, if the dependency is on a higher order feature, that you would need to shift something to the right of other stories. So this makes it really easy to have that real-time collaboration, easier than I found possible in many of the other tools. So the tool is called piplanning.io. Of course, PI Planning app is what they're calling it themselves, but the website is piplanning.io. It syncs with all the often used ALM situations, systems, and that's one of the things I particularly like. You can turn that on and off at will. So I tend to turn it on before planning starts, so that everything that's ready in my case, mostly Jira, is automatically imported to the staging environment that we're going to use for PI planning. So anything that has already been prepared is just there and ready for the teams. And then I turn it off so that there's no sync while we're planning. I turn it on again when the plan is finalized, so 2 days later. And then it automatically updates Jira, eliminating a lot of human error. Of course, introducing a lot of system error if you do it wrong, which is the first time I did this. Was a nice learning moment to really read the manual better. But let's just look, because it solved the main thing that happened for me. And I had to really laugh when I saw their arguably a little bit pithy commercial. I really do want to share it with you, even though it is obviously a commercial. But I had to laugh because it was so recognizable for my personal situation as an RTE. So here
Larry
it is.
is a home office RTE and chose to go with PIPlanning.io. Why? Well, because he was tired of this shit. Tired of Judy being distracted by her dog, doing business on the kitchen floor just as Larry was explaining which of the 6 different apps would be used for the confidence vote. Surprise, surprise, Judy. You just missed important info, and now you're going to have to go bother Larry about it. He's also tired of Bruce, who Larry is convinced was the one deleting the story points label in the digital whiteboard solution. All estimations gone. For a moment, Larry swore he could see his life flash before his eyes. Or, well, at least his career. And of course, Larry is tired of Jesse, and Sarah, and Arthur, and Chen, and Maggie, who all did a bunch of stupid things with the complex tool set that Larry picked for PI planning. Though obviously, it wasn't their fault. Larry knows that. You see, RTEs are human beings, like you and me. But without them, we are in big trouble. So let's give them the solutions they deserve before they lose their marbles once and for all. Larry found his solution with PIPlanning.io. Does your RTE know about PIPlanning.io?
Now, of course, as I said, this is a commercial, but the thing that really made me want to use this and try this is what you see here behind me on the board. It is the actual real-time sync between, and they have this on their website, between Denver and London, which, to be honest, it's really, really awesome to see it perform this well. And of course, to make it perform that well, it's kind of Spartan coding. It's a Spartan look, but I've not run PI planning without it since I discovered this. Even though, yes, it could be considered quite expensive, because I think it boils down to about $7 per user per month. And of course, if you only use it once a quarter, that is actually kind of expensive. Still, it's way cheaper than flying, and I intend to keep using this because it completely solved my problem. And I don't encounter many tools that do that as completely as this one did. So I'm very confident and happy to promote them. But however, before this actually turns into a sales pitch for not even my own product, which would be weird, they're not paying me. I'm not associated with them in any way, shape, or form, even though while I was creating this presentation, I thought, well, let's connect on LinkedIn. So if you check there, you can see that I'm linked in with all of them. But that was mostly because I just had some questions also with regard to pricing and all that good stuff. Because I want a better deal, of course, because yes. Oh, wait a second. Sound is not clear. Is that my current sound that is not clear? Or was that from the video? Because if it was from the video, then that could be just me. Okay, so the recorded one in the video, good. My apologies there. I did test that beforehand, but, well, sometimes it goes wrong. Anyway, it was just a commercial, so don't worry about that too much. But remember that lessons are repeated until learned. And that also means for remote PI planning, the main lesson is that the first time you do it, it'll probably not be awesome, right? So I learned a ton by doing them wrong first, or by doing them suboptimal first. So not necessarily completely wrong, but there was something iffy about them. It took too long. People were not engaged enough. Tools were sort of crappy. And therefore, just do it more often, experiment, just like you would with any other agile thing. So what are my lessons? Because it's also 10:22, so we need to start wrapping up already. My main lessons are, and that's actually something that's a new one. It's the limit whip, which of course isn't the main lesson in Lean to begin with, but also limit whip specifically when you do remote PI planning. This is really, really important because that makes it flow easier. What do I mean with limit whip? One feature at a time per team. So don't let the teams pull all the features they think they should be doing from the program board. Have them pick them one by one and then work through them one by one. Completely story them one by one. And of course, as an RTE, I often need to step in to prevent the teams from doing full bore iteration planning sessions, because those follow after, right? So I need to remind them this is the first story slicing session. It is not the end all be all of story slicing. So I just wanted to chunk this down into stories that are sort of big enough to plan in a sprint, but they don't have to be completely ready yet. That's actually what we do in the regular Scrum. So they can go about that really fast per feature. And doing that per feature really makes it flow better, because now they get to really think per feature on the dependencies, put them on the board also. And that's also, you use the PI planning tool that I showed, then that will automatically show up on their boards, probably still have some room for it, so it's less frustrating. But if you take the features in the order that they are on the program board, it'll also ensure that you start loading the planning for the entire train in the right order without needing to redo a lot. And that's actually one of the things, Rike, that you can get some more energy into it, because now it becomes the sport. Who is slicing this? You're interacting around this one. So as a team, you're now doing the feature. So you don't get a lot of people who are doing this in pairs. You start to see teams doing this as a team and then shopping around with their stories to other teams as a team. And it becomes a much more interactive, much more engaged thing around the work, right? Because even though I also have some tips on how to make it more engaging besides the work, a lot of people actually love to do the work that they do. And making them do that in a more effective and efficient manner is itself engaging. At least that's what I found. And yeah, to put some in the mix for the inevitable boredom that still will ensue, I have some tips coming up. One of those tips is to use signals. Of course, we all know about colors already. You define the colors so you can see in one glance on the boards what's what. That's one of the main tenets in SAFe, predefined, agreed upon colors, which is one of the other reasons I prefer using the PI planning app, because there, as an RTE, you can set those colors, and then when somebody marks something as a story or as a feature or as a risk, it'll automatically get the right color. So you will never have the issue that I always keep having with teams, that they think, oh, but I like flaming pink better than yellow, so let's make all our stories flaming pink. Therefore, negating the whole point of having that agreement about the color coding. It's not really important if it's yellow or pink. It's just really important that everybody uses the same color. Now, if you have the choice, it feels off that you can't use it. So people will always end up adding some extra color just for kicks and giggles and for fun, because, well, they're bored. That's exactly like just mentioned. So you have to respect that as well. You can't get angry about something as stupid as that color. But if they can't choose it, they'll be creative somewhere else, and you will still have the notion of the color-coded sticky. So, okay, so without diving into that too much, I use a lot of icons on the sticky notes to signal specific things. So exclamation marks, question marks, usually nuclear radiation marks, stuff like that. Nuclear radiation is all stakeholders need to swarm to this team to help them out because they have figured out a big dependency or a major question. Sometimes the ask is, should we even be doing this? But exclamation mark usually is RTE, please come and help. Question mark is product management, please come and help. A $sign is business owner, please come and help. And it makes it really easy to have those signals discussed and prepared in advance so people know how to put them on their sticky notes on their boards. And it makes it fun even because people start to hunt for those signals. You can do sounds and lights and gestures, of course, as well. I find that icons for an online session is actually better. So maximize engagement. This is to the question that was just asked. I use not a lot, but some quizzes. Could be in Kahoot, could be in Mentimeter, but sometimes just at the end of the day, just a pub quiz, because one of the things that we lost entirely with PI planning is that normally at the end of day one with your team, you go and have drinks and maybe go out, even get to know each other better in a little less formal setting, which is highly beneficial to make truly gel teams that live and breathe the prime directive, so to speak, and just trust each other completely and get after it as a team. For that to happen, you must do more together than just the work. You must actually get to know each other a little. And it helps if you eat together because that's an almost universal way to get to know one another. But we can't because of COVID. And most of us really do not want another round of drinks in front of a camera. But it's good if there's an activity there. I find pub quizzes tend to be hilarious, specifically if they're like created by one team, maybe to trip up all the others, like weird questions in there. That tends to be a ton of fun. That's the end of the day activity in almost all of the PI planning that I run. And during the day, I spread out some Kahoots or some Mentimeter questions. Mentimeter is usually used for feedback on the event. I don't wait until after the event. I just keep asking maybe every 3 hours or so. So twice in a day, because the days are 6 hours. What, if any, feedback they have in a really quick poll. So not a write everything you can think of kind of poll, but if you were to choose between these three improvements, which one would it be? What is your suggestion in the poll right before, so that we already have improvements decided? Sometimes I'm already acting on them as that data comes in. And a lot of people not just like that, but it makes it immediately better, which I think is even better than doing that between PIs. So that's how I use these tools. Of course, for this, you can choose whatever you need. And sometimes just having a board in Mural where you just ask people to put up some stuff works just as well, right? So you don't need to use all these specific tools. The other thing is to, as a corollary to maximizing engagement, I also find it's really, really important to minimize boredom, because that's how engagement almost automatically goes up. You just avoid that people become bored. One of the main things there is to never allow anyone, not even me, to talk for more than 20 minutes at the same time, at a stretch. So present as if you are at TEDx. I actually have TEDx clocks running for that very purpose, so that it actually becomes TEDx. And as you heard when we started, I use a soundboard to, for example, make some noise in between, to make sure that that people know it's time for the next round or whatever, right? So that also becomes part of the sound signaling in the session. And as you note, I make it a point to have everything hooked up so that I can use it when needed, and everybody will hear that. I'll make sure that everybody knows that they might hear that, and I did not do that now. So my apologies if I now banged your ears. That was not the intent. The other thing that is actually my main tip for the day, because I discovered that only like 1 month ago, and I wondered, why haven't I started doing that earlier? Add explainer videos to features. So instead of explaining all the features at length at the start of the day, which is why that usually takes up to 2 hours to really do well, I have that done in the prep and then add explainer videos that have somebody talk through the feature in a like a 10-minute video that you don't show at the start of the day. But as you pick up that feature, there's a 10-minute video of the program manager, the product manager, to explain why this feature is important and what they need done. And if that raises a question, you go to the product manager to ask some questions, and that already stimulates the interaction that you would want in a PI. And it's a pretty fast way to limit boredom, because now there's no long-winded talk. It's just, these are the features. The essence, of course, of all the features is presented. Is I feel that that's important in API planning, but most of the details are left for when you pick it up. And then sometimes you discover, ooh, if I see this detail, I need to run to the other team immediately because that's not our thing. So, team breakouts, okay, energy-wise, but the big room session get to be very one-way communication and kind of flat. Yeah, I totally do agree. That's one of the reasons that I'm saying try to limit those. So in the regular guidance that you get from Scaled Agile Inc., as awesome as it is, they still hold true to the time box that they have for it. And that makes sense because it really does take that amount of time to explain the features properly and the planning context. So my main suggestion there is try to move some of that into explainer videos. Could be like those whiteboard animated videos that I personally love to create. So that is like a win-win right there. But it could also be as simple as just a Loom video talking through a discussion of that feature as you can find it in the ALM system, because it doesn't have to be rocket science, right? It could just be the program manager, the product manager, the product owner, somebody really involved in creating, defining that feature, explaining what it is, why it's important, what problem it solves, what they're hoping for it, what the hypothesis is that's behind this. All the things that you would normally drone on about in the main room. So I see that there are no open questions. That is either because all of you have already left, I managed to bore you, or you saved up all the questions until this very minute that I start asking. So do you have any questions or feelings about this? And lovely to see that you're still here, Sandeep. You were the first one in and probably last one out. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Luca, for your remarks. Is there anything you would like me to elaborate on some more, or a question that you would like me to answer? If you do have that, just pop it in the Q&A or in the chat, because as you can notice, I'm actually looking at the chat right now. No questions from Luca. Rika liked the background pictures. I love that this worked. Talk about tools. That is a tool called a coworker of mine recently pointed me towards it, and I thought, oh, I have to figure out a way to try that real quick. And I'm trying that now in this webinar. I've used it once before, but I like what it can do with the background, and it's almost like a TV studio, but I'm just sitting in front of my computer at home right now. So I kind of like that. Yeah, the name, because that's not obvious. It's actually this. And they have a totally flippant video as well of why they chose that name. Definitely, even if you don't start using that tool, watch that video because it's hilarious. And let's see. It feels like I need to be a media master instead of a coach, says Hans Kornips. And yeah, there is some truth to that, sadly, because doing this remote requires all the same skills as the game show host that you need it to be to begin with as an RTE to host API planning well. But now you need to focus much more on the technical side of things as well, which indeed makes it more into a media master and a little bit less of a coach. I found that as you become better with the tech and as you limit the number of tools as much as you can, because it'll confuse the hell out of people if you use 9 or 10 different tools, not in the last place yourself. So try to limit the tools that you use and then really learn how to use them. Spend some time doing that so that it becomes almost automatic. By now, I don't really have to think about the tools and how I use them. So now I can start focusing more on the coaching again. And somehow I picked up some of the game show hosty tricks. So one of the main tricks I'd like to give you before we stop the webinar is the thing that I've been doing the whole time during this webinar is I've been talking to you. And the way that I've been doing that is by actually looking straight into the camera. I know that this is a tip that's been like overshared already, but not everybody knows it. And sometimes it's good to get a reminder. If you look at the camera now, it feels as if I'm looking into your eyes. If I look at my notes or if I look at myself on the screen, it looks like this, which is immediately apparent because that's how fast we pick up on those kinds of visual cues. If you do that in your PI planning, it'll automatically increase engagement from the other people who are looking at the screen and who now feel that they're actually being talked to. That's a little studio trick that they teach all presenters in media training. So let me see if there's any other question. Elaborate a little bit on Miro and mural tools in the last few minutes. Well, mostly what they are is like huge honking whiteboard tools that are completely free format. And what I find is I create templates for the sessions I run in there when I give training. It's almost always done out of either Mural or Miro. And I have all the exercises in there. And I do the same thing for PI planning. So for specific team breakout room activities that I'd like teams to do, and usually also for their retrospectives and stuff like that in the day before PI planning, when we do the inspect and adapt event, I tend to set up murals for each team specifically that are easily shared. And that's actually the other tip I forgot to tell. So thanks for asking this. Yeah, Hans, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have worn black. It works better when I wear a white shirt. That I noticed. Anyway, but what I forgot to tell is that if you make some of those activities like really team specific, so they have their own team mural, and then ask them to present it, that also breaks up the day a little, and they get to talk about more than just the planning. Of course, you could also do that as video. It's just that you have some other type of interaction around maybe some other type of activity. And that I find the mural boards and the mural boards help tremendously. So if there is nothing else, I would like to thank you for your presence and your questions. And I hope you enjoy your day.